Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Well, I like to mix these videos in while I'm focusing on other playlists here. Sometimes I do these because I love still knowing about the information involving the world of Mafia and Gangsters. Some of the characters within them, some of the storylines, the history, just fascinating info that to this day I still like coming across. Such is the case of this guy here, this mobster who was an underboss for the Los Angeles crime family. How about that? It seems like there's been like a small streak of videos focusing on these westward bound crime family associates. But yeah, he was an underboss, could have been boss at one point, but because he wasn't and was eventually demoted, it ended up becoming a murder-suicide, and that's essentially how he was killed afterward. But more information on that here in a minute. But it has to do with this. You're looking at him now. His full name was Girolomo Adamo, but as always, he had a nickname like a lot of other mobsters had, and in his case, it was Momo. So interesting stuff. No, Momo Adamo. How about that for a very memorable name? So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the interesting information associated with this would-be boss. So who was Momo Adamo? Well, he was someone that was born back in 1895. No exact date, like when it comes to the month and the date and the day specifically. There in Sicily. At some point, though, both he and his brother ended up moving over to the U.S. First, in the Chicago area. That's when they first arrived. He was living there specifically. But then afterward, switching over to Kansas City. And then afterward, switching over from Kansas City over to Los Angeles. So all three cities, of course, heavily featuring at that time and maybe even up to this point, stuff involving the world of mafia and gangsters. So no doubt from a very early age, he was involved in that world. And then, in fact, it was at the urging of the Kansas City crime family boss, a guy by the name of Johnny Lazio, that urged him originally to move to Kansas City. He was there, in fact, for a little bit of time. He ran a speakeasy during the very, very lucrative Prohibition era, something else that I focused on here on this channel throughout some of the past videos. This was a place that was called the Garden of Naples, and because of it, it eventually led him to move over to Los Angeles back in 1935. So by that point, he had a wife, a woman by the name of Marie, and also a son by the name of Paul, and he was then working under the Los Angeles crime family, rising through the ranks until he eventually became underboss to the boss at the time, Jack Dragna. So interestingly enough, you can see that he was, if you call it that, successful enough to move between different cities, and then eventually moving to Los Angeles and then growing in there to become the eventual underboss. His brother Joseph also was involved with the Los Angeles crime family, and they were working with other connected mobsters out there, including those in San Diego and then other places as well. Eventually, though, in 1950, Momo got pinched. He was arrested along with several other members there of the Los Angeles crime family. And then when that happened, that's when things kind of slowed down for just a little bit. But either case, though, Jack Dragna, who was the boss again at the time, fled the state. And when that happened, things just took a different turn afterward. They were eventually taken into custody by the Los Angeles Police Department, him and then 4 other people. This might have been the closest thing to them, including him, in other words, Momo, being involved with a serious crime, like a serious culpable, actually going to court and being found guilty type crime. This would have involved the bombing of a home of a guy by the name of Mickey Cohen. But they were all eventually released because there just wasn't enough evidence to be able to showcase that, yes, this was them, they were the ones that did it. The kind of evidence, in other words, that's more on the lines of a smoking gun, if you call it that. But even though they knew who built the bomb, there was no other evidence that would link them to it, and so he was essentially set free. And then things took a different turn. What was hopeful for, in this case, Momo, to be good news actually ended up being the worst news possible. The boss himself, Jack Dragna, ended up dying in 1956. And at that time, who knew? This was the first time I ever heard of something like this. I'm wondering if this was in other parts of the mafia world out there in the U.S. But it turns out when the boss dies, there's going to be a casting of a vote, in other words. And this vote would then help decide who would be the boss. Someone fill me in on this. Is this true, like when it comes to other parts of the U.S., maybe other parts of the world, when it comes to the boss? It's whoever's going to be, in other words, next in line. Is it truly a voting system, in other words, when it comes to that? And so he was very hopeful. He was there for a while. He was running the underboss role for a while, too. He was someone that could be considered loyal to the family, and then making sure, of course, that yes, that he would be naturally next in line. He was the underboss, right? I mean, underboss is one level below. What's to say that they shouldn't be when it comes to being the boss next in line on that part? But as it turns out, Frank DeSimone was elected. In fact, it was considered a rigged election. Can you believe that? In the world of the mafia, especially when it comes to voting for bosses, rigged elections can happen there too. Isn't that just craziness? Like, you would not think that this would be in there when it comes to the mafia, but apparently there's rigged elections. And so once Frank DeSimone won, then in turn, Momo Adamo was demoted, and then that was almost his point of self-defeat. Like, he pretty much moved out of Los Angeles area, went over to San Diego, and then things took a turn much for the worse, because at that same point in that same year, in other words, that's when he attempted a murder-suicide with his wife, the aforementioned wife that I was mentioning earlier, Marie. So it turns out he attempted to kill her and commit suicide on his part. He did end up shooting himself and then killing himself. He actually shot his wife in the head too, but miraculously, she ended up surviving. I'm guessing that this rigged election and the outcome of it, being so loyal after all these years and then not becoming the boss, it just took too much of a turn to him. I mean, it was a point of no return whenever it came to that bit of news. And unfortunately, it was him taking out on someone else, in this case being his wife. And then, of course, she ended up, luckily, very much so surviving. So good stuff on that part. But yes, there was that as far as the murder-suicide, and that was the end of Momo Adamo. He basically killed himself while attempting to kill his wife at the same time, too. Interestingly enough, there were theories as to why, other ideas as to why Momo Adamo ended up trying to do a murder-suicide. One bizarre theory, strange one, that a lot of people don't believe, but it's still thrown out there, is the idea that Frank DeSimone, remember the new boss of the Los Angeles crime family, apparently raped Adamo's wife, and he forced Adamo to watch. And this was too much for Momo to take afterward, and that's when he tried to do the murder-suicide. Again, a lot of people don't necessarily believe that one, especially when they consider the type of character that Frank DeSimone was. Another theory is this: it's that the wife Marie was actually having an affair during that same time, and then he found out about it, and then of course he couldn't take it anymore, and then that's when he tried to kill her while killing himself. And again, that's just another alternate theory. But unfortunately, there's never been any confirmation as to what the true story was as far as Momo Adamo and his eventual death. Nobody has ever come forward stating otherwise. Marie has never mentioned anything else. I don't even know if she's still alive at this point. But if she's not, she never mentioned anything else afterward as to what truly occurred leading up to the murder-suicide. But at least that paints the information as to what happened to the life of Girolomo Momo Adamo. So if anyone has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. What about those of you in the Los Angeles area? Maybe on the local level, if you know more info with regards to that. I see the comments all the time. I always see relatives posting updates about people that I've talked about in my videos, or other people that were neighbors, or even some cases co-workers that knew people associated with some of the mobsters that I mentioned in my videos. They post these updates too. So those of you that are again there in the Los Angeles area, maybe you know more information as to this guy Momo Adamo, then please post those comments below. I'd definitely love to hear them. All right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.